there's so much I love about Chile. I loved learning about the Chilean culture. I think a thing that I appreciate and admire about the Chilean culture is how dedicated and loyal people are. People are about families, and they love their families, and they take care of their families from when you're a baby to when you die. And I saw so many people, taking family members in that were this removed cousin, or my grandma that's super old, and so now she lives with us, and I loved that sense of family stick together, no matter what. I was actually talking to someone today about that very thing, and so that was one of the things about the Chilean culture that I admire the most, was how loyal people are to each other, especially their families. Another thing that I loved about Chilean culture was just how kind people are generally. People are generally really nice. Even if they're not interested in the message that we were sharing, they'd be like, "Hey, how's it going? Come on in. You're thirsty? Do you need something?" And obviously that's not everyone, but for the most part, people were just very friendly and very trusting and welcoming. I think to my life right now, I'm like, am I that trusting? Do I allow people to come into my home and treat them and with goodness and kindness, and give them the benefit of the doubt? And so anyway, that's something I definitely admire about the Chilean culture there. I love the food in Chile. I remember one of the first things I noticed about eating in Chile was that they didn't have salad dressing. And I didn't really like salad before my mission unless it was, covered in salad dressing. And so when I got there, they said, "Okay, salad dressing is salt and like oil." And so they'd give us like a piece of tomato and a piece of avocado and a little bit of lettuce. And they say, "There's your salad." And sprinkle a little salt and a little oil on it. I was like, this is so strange. And it took me a minute to get used to it, but I prefer it now. It's a nice, clean way of living. And some of the different things I love, specifically, I love the Chilean mustard. They do hot dogs in a really cool way there. They call them completos, and they put mayo and avocado and Chilean mustard and ketchup. And it maybe sounds weird, but it was so good. Like, just clog your arteries good. And so that's something I really loved, a favorite dish for sure. Something that a lot of Spanish and Mexican and South American cultures can relate to are the small little pastries called empanadas. Sometimes they're sweet, sometimes they're, with beef and meat and stuff. I loved empanadas, and one of the fun things about serving in a lot of my areas is they just have vendors of empanadas that would go around, and if you needed a snack or if you wanted a quick lunch, you just buy an empanada, and they were really good. They were homemade, and I remember one of my areas, we'd have a gentleman come every day at the same time, pass by our apartment and ask if we wanted them, and I would always get, some empanadas from him, and that was a great memory I had. But overall, the food was really great. I don't do fish very well, and I was really nervous, or any seafood for that matter, and I was really nervous. Chile, being that skinny country on the side, right next to the ocean of South America, I was afraid that I would eat a ton of fish. And I don't know if it was just where I was serving or what, but I actually didn't have a ton of fish. I'm sure those people who like fish would go and they'd eat it, and they'd probably say it's really fresh and yummy. But only like in one area was I ever even offered a thing of seafood. But there wasn't a lot of that. It was more rice and meat and beans and salads and vegetables, European style, almost American, but not quite. But very, very tasty. I would say it's, in the best sense of the word, a bland palate, meaning there's not a lot of spice and kick to the food. It was just the natural, tastes of the food, and they would combine them in the very best ways. And I mean, I loved eating in Chile, definitely. And the bread. Oh, I forgot about the bread. The bread was to die for. They'd make it every morning, and typically you'd buy bread in these small little round loaves. You can eat it in a lot of different ways. They had a lot of different kinds, but the most common was these small little round things of bread, and they were hot, and sometimes you'd put some avocado in the middle or whatever, and some jam, and just really amazing. An interesting thing too, they have this kind of meal called once, which is kind of in between lunch and dinner, kind of a brunch type thing, and it was very cultural to sit down to once and have tea or coffee. A couple of my favorite foods, I loved the empanadas. They came as simple as just bread and cheese, kind of baked, and sometimes they'd be as complicated as putting olives and meat and onions and like a little meal inside of this little kind of breaded pocket. But they also had pastry ones, so they put kind of sweeter stuff inside. So empanadas were a favorite for sure. They had this little kind of casserole thing called pastel de choclo, which is like a corn pastry kind of a thing, but it was more like a casserole, and for whatever reason, it reminded me of home, because it had lots of potatoes and little bits of corn and just yumminess in this little casserole, and that was always a favorite. I love the way Chileans speak Spanish. I remember I had a job where I kind of knocked doors in Texas, and so I'd run into a lot of Hispanic people. And when I would speak Spanish to them, they would say, "You sound like a Chilean." And so it was cool to see this kind of very specific dialect that they have in Chile. A couple things that I remember, they always cut the S's off their words. A lot of stuff is slurred together and almost kind of said with a whine that to me became very endearing. You see like a niece or nephew or a child, and they're kind of, "Oh, come on, Ma." It's a very endearing type of way of speaking this kind of Spanish language. And so another thing about Chilean Spanish is they put po at the end. They would, and it didn't mean anything, but they would just put the letter po at the end. ¿Cómo está, po, loco? ¿Qué vamos a hacer, po? So it was just kind of a thing that they did, and they just put po at the end. And I remember when I first got there, I was so confused, feeling like I didn't learn that word, or I didn't learn what is that conjugation, and then I finally figured out that po is just a thing that they kind of throw into everything. I'm just trying to think of a phrase I could say that helped me remember. I remember, "Hola, Elder, ¿cómo está, loco?" And I remember hearing that for the first time, like, "¿Cómo está, loco?" It's also, it's not, but you kind of figure it out, and it's very, like I said, it's very endearing. And so I loved learning Spanish in Chile because it helped me kind of really focus in and listen and help me kind of learn Spanish better, for me anyway. So